Actually, I didn't know this at the time, but at the GBC meetings in Mayapur in the spring of 1999, the GBC finally officially acknowledged that they made wrong decisions about this very issue during that time period in 1977 to 1978. At the 1999 GBC meetings, the GBC chose to make additional major changes in their multi-guru system. His Holiness Jayapataka Swami wrote a letter dated March 24, 1999, in which he addressed his disciples to inform them of these admissions by the GBC. He wrote, quote, "I would like to explain to you something about the new GBC resolutions, which are a big change in ISKCON, at least in relation to how we have been doing things," end of quote. So, to make this more brief, I'm including only pertinent parts of his letter. Again, quote, "There was a lot of confusion after Srila Prabhupada's physical departure or samadhi, and in the wake of that, we, the members of the GBC, believed many things supposedly said by Srila Prabhupada, which later turned out to be incorrect. We were told that Srila Prabhupada appointed us to be gurus, and it was taken by many as some kind of certification that we were on the platform of Paramahamsas or something. Later, we realized that His Divine Grace named us to be authorized to fulfill His orders to act as spiritual masters. It didn't mean that Srila Prabhupada said we were automatically, by definition, Paramahamsas." End of quote. Wow, there's a lot to address in what he wrote. To begin with, Jayapataka stated, quote, "There was a lot of confusion after Srila Prabhupada's physical departure or samadhi, and in the wake of that, we, the members of the GBC, believed many things supposedly said by Srila Prabhupada, which later turned out to be inaccurate." Well, Jayapataka Swami admitted that the GBC were confused after Srila Prabhupada departed. That was not the whole story. In the timeline section, I will provide hard evidence that the GBC was confused on what they thought Srila Prabhupada had said the day he spoke on this issue during the May 28th meetings. It was at that time that the GBC as a body formulated the basis of their understanding or misunderstanding of what they mistakenly thought he wanted on this topic. And it was that mistaken basis back in May of 1977 which had influenced their decisions on this matter ever since. Jayapataka Maharaj admitted in 1999 that in 1977 the GBC believed that Srila Prabhupada said certain things, but later, 22 years later, they finally figured out and publicly admitted that their understanding back in 1977 was inaccurate. He admits the reason for this was that the GBC at that time was confused about what His Divine Grace had actually said. Well, that was quite a big admission. But it was only a partial understanding, and still it took them 22 years, took the GBC 22 years just to get that far. In 1999, the GBC didn't realize just how confused the GBC of 1977 really was. And it wasn't just one detail they got wrong. They got the entire issue wrong from the very beginning. Again, I will address all of this in the chronological timeline section. What Jayapataka was trying to say in his letter, however, was that in 1977, because the GBC thought that Srila Prabhupada had appointed them to become gurus, that these men took that to be some sort of certification that they were now on the platform of Paramahamsas or something. Then, in 1999, the GBC finally realized Srila Prabhupada hadn't actually appointed them as gurus, but rather he had only named them to be authorized to fulfill his orders to act as spiritual masters. Oh yeah, like all the confusion just disappeared and everything makes so much more sense, right? So let me get this see if I got this right. Back in 1977, when the GBC admits they were really confused as to what Srila Prabhupada said, the GBC thought Srila Prabhupada had appointed them to be gurus. But now in 1999, the GBC finally realized just how confused they were back in 1977, and that Srila Prabhupada hadn't actually appointed them. No, instead, he had named them to be authorized to fulfill his order for them to act as gurus. Oh yeah, I mean, I really feel it. This is just so much less confusing than before, right? I mean, can we go over that one more time? Because, you know, I don't know why, but to me, it just sounds like their explanation in 1999 is even more confusing than they say they were in 1977, when they knew they were really confused. Anyway, one more time, okay? Back in 1977, when the GBC was actually confused, they had mistakenly thought Srila Prabhupada had actually appointed them to be gurus. But now in 1999, 22 years later, the GBC finally realized just how confused they were back in 77. And now in 99, they realized that Srila Prabhupada hadn't really appointed them to be gurus. Instead, now the GBC think they are now so much less confused, and they realize that Srila Prabhupada only named them to be authorized to fulfill his order for them to be actual gurus or act as gurus. Okay, I'm still not really feeling this. What is the difference between being appointed to be a guru and being named to be authorized to fulfill his order to act as guru? I mean, what really was the big revelation all about? My apologizes, yes. I don't know about your apologizes. My apologizes. There we go again. My apologies to His Holiness. My apologies to His Holiness Jaipataka Maharaj. But I don't think that your explanation was very clear at that time in 1999. My intention isn't to make fun, but to try to make sense out of this. It was the GBC in 1999 that wasn't as unconfused as they thought they were. The bottom line is, this sounds very similar to something Rabindra Swarup was trying to say even in 1990 at the North American GBC meetings, when he admitted that in the May 28th meeting, Srila Prabhupada never made a distinct and clear statement that he was ordering those men he will soon name as Rtviks to become actual gurus. And so Rabindra Swarup claimed that His Divine Grace was really only pointing them in the general direction, and he was just sort of authorizing them to begin the process of becoming gurus, or begin the process of gurus, and multiple gurus in ISKCON. In the May 28, 1977 meeting, Srila Prabhupada did never directly and explicitly say that he was ordering those men that he will soon select to become Rtviks, that he was ordering them to become actual gurus. Rather, he had said, on my order, become actually guru. So in the 1999, the GBC are saying that Srila Prabhupada didn't actually directly order them to be gurus. Rather, he named them to be authorized to fulfill his order for them to act as guru. One thing this shows us is how expert the GBC are in splitting such thin hairs. There's virtually no significance between those two ideas, appointed or named one to be authorized to fulfill the order to become guru. The real problem is the GBC has been grappling around with this issue for the past 43 years and just aren't that clear on what Srila Prabhupada was really trying to say that day. Here's the problem that the GBC were trying to address. Back in 1977 and prior, the leading senior devotees, and most all of us, had the understanding and realization that to be a bona fide guru, one had to be on the highest Bhagavat or Paramahamsa platform. We had that understanding because that is what Srila Prabhupada and the scriptures state. Srila Prabhupada also said that when one reaches the Paramahamsa platform, that one can no longer fall down. Back when Srila Prabhupada was present, we, his disciples, used to preach like this to those who were following other gurus. We used to preach that Srila Prabhupada was a true and actual Paramahamsa, and as such, he will never fall down, unlike the other charlatan, cheating gurus who were not on the actual Paramahamsa platform. So when the GBC mistakenly thought Srila Prabhupada had appointed the 11 Rtviks to become actual gurus on his disappearance, which he had not, but that is what they confusingly thought back in 1977, then the idea was at the time that Srila Prabhupada had either recognized that these men had already come to the Paramahamsa stage, or that because Srila Prabhupada had appointed them to be gurus, they will automatically rise up to the Paramahamsa stage once they start taking their own disciples, simply on the strength of Srila Prabhupada's ordering them to become guru. The problem was that soon many of these so-called Paramahamsas began falling down. While many devotees knew these men were not on the Paramahamsa platform, the GBC continued to say they were. They just had to be, because they were convinced that Srila Prabhupada had appointed these men to be gurus. And as a guru, one has to be on the Paramahamsa platform. So when someone like Jayatirtha fell down and began taking LSD and having LSD-fueled sex romps with his own female disciples, some of the other gurus and even other GBC members who wanted themselves to become gurus, they were grappling with how to justify this, since they were convinced that His Divine Grace had appointed these men to be gurus. Either Srila Prabhupada had recognized them to be Paramahamsas, or by his order, Prabhupada had elevated them to that platform. Some of these gurus were even arguing that a true Paramahamsa is actually above all the rules and regulations, like Lord Shiva, who can drink poison or take intoxicants and not be affected. So some of them even tried to argue that Jayatirtha's taking LSD and having sex with these female disciples, although it was against principles for lesser devotees, for a Paramahamsa, he is transcendental. So this can be seen as a transcendental pastime of a Paramahamsa. They felt that for the rest of the society, he was not setting a good example, and so they tried to reel him back in. They didn't want to admit that he wasn't really a Paramahamsa because a guru is supposed to be. But as the fall downs of these gurus got more and more serious and more fallen, like Kirtananda's being found guilty of racketeering, mail fraud, child molestation, criminal intent to commit murder, those were not just the transcendental leela or pastimes of a real Paramahamsa. Obviously, the argument or idea that these men were any sort of Paramahamsas wasn't holding water anymore. This left the GBC with the conundrum. If Srila Prabhupada had appointed these men to be guru, then did he appoint men who were not really Paramahamsas? Or had he not really appointed them? The GBC refused to accept the Rtvik Ras idea and continued to believe Prabhupada had wanted them to become gurus. And so they grappled with this problem for years and years. As the Rtvik Ras supporters were passing out more literature making this point that these were not Paramahamsas and that Srila Prabhupada had never appointed them to be guru, the GBC were being pressed to figure out and how to justify and rationalize how Srila Prabhupada could have appointed men to be guru who were not Paramahamsas. How, if Srila Prabhupada had appointed them to be gurus, how could they fall down? Finally, after grappling this for so many years, in 1999, the GBC came up with this extraordinary and exemplary realization that cleared up this entire problem. Their explanation was intended to sound very erudite and intellectual, but in reality, the better description is that their explanation fits Srila Prabhupada often used phrase, word jugglery. The GBC reached down into their bag of tricks and came up with this magical rationalization that Srila Prabhupada had actually not appointed them to be guru. Rather, he had just only named them to be authorized to fulfill his order for them to act as guru. And with this sleight of hand, or jugglery of words, the GBC was saying, see, since they were never directly ordered or appointed to be guru, they don't have to be on the Paramahamsa platform. Rather, Srila Prabhupada had only just named them to be authorized to start to fulfill the order for them to act like gurus. By these word-juggling magic tricks, we are now to understand how it is that these men can act like gurus and yet not actually have to be Paramahamsas. This was the GBC's great realization back in 1999. Basically, they were just grasping at straws to just come up with any good-sounding rationalization to justify how they can continue to promote this multi-guru path as being the path that Srila Prabhupada really wanted. The GBC have been stuck between a rock and a hard place because they were still convinced that Srila Prabhupada had wanted these men to become gurus, yet they had to justify all the fall downs. And at the same time, the GBC were just as convinced that the idea of an ongoing Rtvik Representative system where Srila Prabhupada was to remain the actual initiator guru was just a totally bogus idea. So they couldn't accept that, but they had to come up with some explanation that at least sounded lofty and plausible as to how we can have gurus who are not Paramahamsas. This now let the GBC openly promote the idea that one doesn't have to be on the Paramahamsa platform to be guru, so that in this way practically anyone can become guru.